Good morning. I'd like to open by acknowledging that we are on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I would like to pass my respects to their elders, past, present, and as a former youth worker, celebrate the emerging leaders that are taking the journey ahead from this day forward. I would like to thank the speaker before me who spoke so beautifully and well polished about the partnerships that we try and work across the sector to assist our work and us assist their work in making the world a better place. It was hard work, but often great, polished work, even in its difficulty of working with people we don't naturally work with to make the world a better place. I'm now going to speak this way, not across the sectors of people that we try to work with, but co-design is around bringing in community. When you work with community, it is clunky, hard, unpolished, and difficult to know when and where it's going to end. As such, I may be the perfect presenter for you this morning. I'm going to start by saying that everybody in this room is on a different part of the co-design journey. Some people are absolutely on top of this and they've got it right. Some people feel that they're absolutely on top of this and they're absolutely wrong. Some staff know that their managers think that they are entirely on top of this and that they are entirely wrong. Some organisations think that they have this, and in fact they've even put it into their values of their organisation. They're yet to actually put that into the hardcore culture of their practice. And many of us are here at the start going, well, how do I start and where do I go? And I think I've got a bit of an idea, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to respectfully say, I don't know where you are on that journey. I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs wherever you are. We're going to start through it. Hopefully at the end, you'll all go to morning tea and say, yeah, I pretty much knew what that was. I had a good understanding of it. There may even be awkward conversations in the car at the end of the day going, that's all well and good, but how would we ever get that rolled into normal cultural practice in our organisation? And there are others, managers who go, yeah, we tried that once in 2011 or 12. It was hard work. It killed us. The organisation was burnt. The officer left the organisation, never to return. Their reputation is trashed. We're not touching co-design in reality again. So let's just allow that to be the uncomfortable presence of what co-design is. Sorry, yep. Perfect. So in saying that, we know that I'm borrowing Simon Sinek's The Golden Circle of start with the why and then the how and then the what. Co-design is not playing in the why, but it leaps off the why. It is very much around engaging the how and challenging the what. That should then redrive back up and challenge your why, but that's at the organisational level. Co-design is playing in the how and the what. It taps into community development frameworks. It's there, great. It taps into community development frameworks, which is very much around process and journey, less about outcomes, or particularly outputs, and we need to remember when outputs and outcomes are different. Outcomes will always be around change. The output is about the product. The process is very much around understanding the starting point, the driver for change, the sense of urgency as to why something has to happen now. And beyond that, it is around vulnerability. Vulnerability is one of the hardest things for an organisation or a system or a sector to allow to have air. Vulnerability says what we are doing isn't perfect and isn't entirely right. And particularly respectfully to the health sector, where the sense of expertise is paramount, that can be very hard. and I respectfully acknowledge, that needs to be part of the dialogue in co-design. Because if you think everything is right and that everything that you were doing is creating the outcomes that you thought right from the start, then there's no need for change. Change comes from acceptance of other wisdoms needing to come into the table to find a new normal, to find a new way of doing things. And that means listening, not continually doing and driving. So in that vulnerability comes that mutual respect that says other people bring a wisdom to our table that we don't have. And I mean it in the way that wisdom is not just evidence-based practice, but wisdom comes from other stories, other local situations, other problems and other ways of hearing things that then drive a revised new solution. The way that we engage with community then means that we need to accept their wisdom. Co-design is not consultation. Consultation might form part of it. Informing, listening, creating may inform all part of co-design. But co-design is an entire practice built on community development, built on social justice, and built on vulnerability. The vulnerability to learn rather than the drive to be leaders. And the language of leaders that prevents vulnerability or prevents learning and prevents co-design, this is evidence-based practice. This is best practice. This is world's best practice. This is built on, Denmark's model, Canada's model, New Zealand's model, everywhere but America's model and Britain's model. As long as it's not those two places, we can be all right. But that stuff that says this is world's best practice stops us from being vulnerable and stops us from learning. But the wisdom has to be broader than the linear line between I've identified a problem and here is a health-based solution. Now I say that knowing that I am a local government geek. I am a community sector geek and a long-playing geek. So I know that we are far from perfect. Everybody gets equally frustrated with local government as we get frustrated with the other sectors here today. Because rarely does that vulnerability come to the table and allow us to change. Rarely does listening take the lead. We've seen a little bit of these equality and equity things in the past. I was quite happy. Sorry, over there, oh no, you can see it on that screen. I love the third one. You can probably not read it. In the first image, it is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same support. That's equality. In the second image, we change the support so that everybody has equal access. That is equity. They are treating equitably. In the third image, all three can see that the change comes from removing the cause of the inequality in the first place. Removing that cause, removing that systemic barrier meant that everybody accessed it without perpetually propping up the system. We defend systems wholeheartedly and passionately far too often when we also know that they're imperfect. So in that, if we know that people are coming to the table, we also know that we are vulnerable, we know that we are imperfect, we know that therefore the change will come at our level, not at their level. So I've never changed a person in my life. I am a father of 4. I interact with my kids every single day and I've never changed one aspect of their lives. They frustrate the hell out of me. They occasionally pretend to change to placate me, to get away with something, but the reality is the only things that I've ever done is heighten the things that frustrate me about them and highlight the fantastic things about them. I've never changed a trait of theirs. So if I can't change a trait of my own kids, how can I ever change the trait of somebody that might come to my programs or my meetings once a week or whatever? So if I can't change them, I can learn from them and I can listen to them. That change then comes back to me. I'm sitting in the room, I'm sitting with a bunch of people. That change may then change our practices and our programs into the future, but it won't necessarily change them. Now, having said all of that, the process of co-design, the entire process of sitting with a bunch of people and challenging the environment, challenging the world, challenging the sector, challenging their expectations, and being challenged in return by it, that dialogue is so powerful that their participation in that is probably more powerful and influence in their life than then going back to being a participant in whatever program it was or a potential service recipient of that initial service. And there are many activities where that occurs. If you look sometimes in the Aboriginal communities or the called communities, they will say, what we're doing is we're setting up an advertising and marketing program where 20 or 30 of us will sit in a room and we'll design a whole thing and we'll go through a whole journey of why breastfeeding is important, or young people's participation in school or transition to work is important, and they will go through a year's work, come up with a marketing strategy and put it on the radio. Their participation in that project is far more powerful, both in their lives and the people that they influence, than the radio marketing strategy ever will be. You've created 30 champions for change who have 5 family members each who engage in that program, who then tell 20 other people. You've gone from someone who is a participant of a service to someone who is a champion for change. None of that has ever happened with the word consultation. Okay? I want to talk very quickly about consultation. Have I said that expertise is the enemy of consultation? Expertise is the enemy of facilitation. Facilitation is the process of co-design. Expertise defends what they already thought at the start. Ever worked with an architect? No, you're wrong. That door has to be there and it needs to be frosted glass because of la 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 la. It doesn't matter whether it's your house, it doesn't matter whether it's your community centre or your hospital, whatever that is, the architect consults, but only to listen and tell all of the feedback and how it was wrong, and that their original position was right all along. They are hard work. Architects are not just designers, they are architects of services, they are architects of programs. We are talking about the architects of our organisation. Architects who are the designers, whose infallibility cannot be questioned, are the enemy of facilitation. Facilitation is the process of co-design. Okay, so if you are not prepared to change and your organisation is not prepared to change, then don't do co-design and don't say you're doing co-design. It's okay. It's like a perfect example before. The network. A network is a perfect example of a group of organisations getting together to chat and share information. It melts my brain when a network becomes a collaboration without actually changing one thing on the ground. Suddenly it's a collaboration, but all we do is have afternoon tea and share information about ourselves. It's a network. It's valid, but call it what it is. Don't call it something you want it to be unless you're actually changing to be that thing. All right, I'm going to finish with a story. I don't know how long I've got. I'm one of those perfect clunky people with no concept of time. You may be aware of the IAP2 framework of public participation. It talks about informing, consulting, through to handing over decision making. If you look at one of these ladders of participation, through coercing and educating and informing, consulting, right up the top in the pink is around co-designing, and beyond that is co-producing. Co-producing is a pretty magnificent thing to get to, but you can't necessarily do it all the time. Have the organisational conversations about when and where this might be appropriate and when and where your organisation might be ready for it. Having those conversations honestly and truthfully over a long period of time may actually be one of the greatest steps of cultural change that your organisation may make, and in its own right, its vulnerability is an organisational co-design process, then enabling where and when you will co-design with community. So step into it, engage it at levels of your organisation, because it may then create an environment where co-designing and co-producing can happen. All right, co-producing. I worked in the Black Saturday recovery in a very small township that was very hard hit by that tragedy. That small community lost a significant number of their recognised leaders in their community. They were a group of highly engaged professional people who in other cases would be sitting in this room. The day after Black Saturday, they were as equally vulnerable and traumatised and horrified and without any leadership or power or direction as any community that I've ever worked with. And crazily, before I knew the word co-design, we started a crazy co-design process of community-led recovery. I broke every rule going on that day and for the next 3 years after that, where we had a committee of 35. You want a committee of 12, you can control them, that will get direction, da-da-da-da-da. We created a committee of 35 because we said anybody that wants to be on it will be on it. And we said anybody that feels that they can contribute in some way, be there. And we had 3-hour weekly meetings for 6 months. You ever formed an incorporated association where you download the model rules and pay $88 and then you're an incorporated association? It took us 3 months to design the model rules and where we wanted to go, because that community needed to go through the entire process of working, who it would let into that community, what agencies, what partnerships they would form, how they would form them, the role of local government, where they would play with them. They told state government how they would play with them. I got calls from DHHS and everyone in state government screaming at me because I was slowing down the process. We sat there on one of the Monday nights in that township, and I said, I want you all to be here. Why are you here? And 20 of them said, we don't trust this community and we don't trust this process, but we're going to sit here until we feel comfortable. And I said, beautiful, love it, want you here. If we are doing, the rules are then, if we are doing something wrong, you must tell us. You must work with this. If we are screwing this up, tell us. And if we are doing it right, you must tell everybody in your town what we are doing, so that you not only trust us, but then you build the trust with everybody else. Okay? So co-design didn't say we know the process, we've got it right, we know how this is going to do it, and we know what the achievement will be at the end. We didn't even know. It wasn't well written and well structured in the books back then. 18 months later, they were probably the most highly functioning community recovery and renewal association in Victoria. They have won every award by 7 years later going around, And their model is best practice for every emergency event Australia-wide since then. And they have been on a speaking tour around Australia perpetually until they probably all broke down. But God love them. And I can't tell you that anything in my expertise made that happen, because I cannot, because I haven't been on the speaking tour talking about how awesome I am. I have only been there in with them, co-designing all of that journey ahead, both with them, on behalf of them. They led it, we created it, we kept recreating it, and at the end, only at the end, was it recognised of, whew, that actually worked pretty well, I'd do that again. That's the vulnerability of stepping through a process without knowing it. Expertise knows the outcome at the end and drives a process to achieve that outcome. Vulnerability knows the process at the start and goes through the process to explore and discover the end point. That's the difference. That's it for me.
And that was fantastic. It's great to see, obviously, a legacy of such a tragedy. There's both, a positive legacy benefit, not just for that community, but the ongoing message that is there. Can we have questions, please?
When does a facilitator, being yourself, become a co-designer?
Great. So, a facilitation process perpetually leads into finding the wisdom in others and drawing that out. So it's almost one of those horrible things as the point at which it's not going right rather than the point at which it is. Co-design captures that wisdom but doesn't capture it for ourselves, captures it with them, and they perpetually keep ownership of that rather than transferring that knowledge back out. Okay, so that's the difference. It's that the wisdom and the knowledge is shared and held, not transferred. Okay, which means that it doesn't end. In many ways, it doesn't end. I say to my team when they're out doing programs, we are not an RTO that delivers 12-week training courses. We are change managers with community. So at the end of those 12 weeks of that course, it hasn't ended. I actually want to know that you are frustrated by them 2 years later. We have residual work, we have residual relationships, that learning is perpetual and growing, and that reflection and learning is going back and forward. Consultants and experts come in, they create a report, they deliver it, they move on. In that co-production, co-design way, that knowledge is perpetually fed and rolled through back and forward, and the wisdom is held with the others. So you will find points. We'll find points in our work when it's starting to go wrong. We know it for everything. The cleverest people are the ones who identify earliest and start to make those rectification sort of processes. And the worst ones are the ones that wait until the end and then write a report on where it went wrong. So.
Any other questions? Yep, just stand here, Ben. Yep.
There's a microphone
Will I
at the back, yeah.
Okay. My question's about how, particularly in the process of sometimes you feel like you're making decisions and moving forward and then you're going backwards because someone is unhappy and wants to take you back on the process. How do you facilitate and keep moving forward?
I was reminded last night of Hofstadter's law. I don't know if you know that one. Hofstadter's law means that everything takes longer than you possibly ever imagined it to take, even if you account for Hofstadter's law. It's just that journey and driving through. And the hardest part is actually finding the trust between a management line who love project management, outcome solutions, move on, versus trusting that process of growth and change and being in it and staying in it and finding, it's a great... If you've made a decision and it's gone wrong, then maybe that was the trigger, that maybe that wasn't the decision that the community wanted and they were sabotaging it, or that the organisation didn't want it and it's sabotaging it. They happen. So those decisions are just part of the process. It just needs to be leaned into and accepted and then adjusted for it.
Thanks very much for sharing your stories. I really appreciated your attention to vulnerability and to accepting the wisdom of others. I also wonder, when you're going through a process like that, do you become aware that there needs to be some kind of shared ground rules among a group? I mean, you've got people that have differing kinds of openness and attitudes across a large committee. And did you, in that example, develop some ground rules, and could you give any advice about where people could look for some ground rules that help create an environment of inclusivity?
Yep. Absolutely, we create ground rules, and we create ground rules wherever we go, and it's at times to find the time to write them down. And in many ways, communication is one of the things that I say, never write it down until you've got the answer that you want. If you are communicating verbally, then that's a conversation. If I get it in writing, then that's a position, and a position is much harder to change than a conversation. So we explore the rules, and then you write them down when they're in a good place, filled with the values and the frameworks that you actually think will lead to good rules rather than hostile rules. The rules of inclusiveness rather than the rules of division and accepting divisiveness. So don't write them down until you're ready for them to be set in stone.
Thanks, Ben, for a fantastic presentation. You mentioned with the bushfire example that you said anyone who wanted to be involved could be involved. Is that the sort of the starting point for a lot of co-design approaches? Really, anyone who wants to be involved should be involved, or how do you go about it, or are there different ways of going about it?
It is, and it's more than that too, so thank you. Local government has council meetings that they're all open and everybody that wants to be involved can be involved. We have 94,000 residents in Hobsons Bay. I can promise you we've never had more than 20 people sitting in the gallery of those committee meetings. So in some ways, the validity and trust needs to go beyond just that it's an open invitation to be there, because we've got networks, we've got all sorts of agents of inclusivity. So it's not quite enough. Where that starting point and how you open the dialogue will probably be leaders in whether they see the value in coming, whether they see the value in coming again, and whether they see the value in investing, which is exactly the same as earlier with your interagency networks, the difference between tapping in, leaving brochures and touching base, and the point at which investment is made. And I am done.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks very much. Thank you.